Public Works Board meeting to order. Roll call.
Mr. Cross?
Here.
Mr. Derzinski?
Here.
Mr. Engel?
Here.
Mr. Fisher?
Here.
Ms. Hughes is excused. Mr. Nash?
Here.
Mr. Sable?
Here.
Mr. Skolnick?
Here.
Ms. Wilkins?
Here.
Ms. Arter?
Here.
Mr. Kaplan?
Here.
One is present.
Okay, and approval of the agenda. So moved.
Support.
Moved by Cross, seconded by Ms. Wilkins. Any discussion? Okay, go ahead and vote. All in favor?
Aye.
All against? Okay. Approval of the minutes.
So, support.
Moved by Mr. Nash, seconded by Mr. Derzinski. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All against? Public comment. Public comment on an agenda item today. Okay, seeing none. Mr. Fisher, Drain Commissioner, your annual presentation, please.
At your discretion, can I sit here or do you want me up there?
I think it's gonna be fine.
All right, does everybody have copies of this in an email or hard copy form that we have with you, because it wasn't attached to the agenda? So we're all set? All right.
It was mailed out, if you're looking for it, it was emailed on April 3rd.
And then again today, just a little
And
bit.
again today.
So has anybody, before I get going, has anybody got any questions if you've gone through it? If not, I'll go through it briefly. This is not a PowerPoint presentation. Okay, I'll get started. The report, for those of you that have been with me since 2010, is very much like it was in 2011 and 2010. It's carrying on the same format. The first part of it is just an introduction and thanking you for all the cooperation I get from you and the staff. Second part of it is just an introduction and a description of who my office is, who my personnel, who are my folks I have in the office, the statutory obligations, and how the office is put together relative to the federal or to the state regulations. The third part is again kind of regurgitated from last year's report, and it's a water resources section on it. It talks about water quality and watershed management, my views on the watershed management. And it also brings the information so that you have it current in your hands, contacts for all of the volunteer organizations across the county that are working with each one of the different watersheds, Muskegon watershed, Long Lake watershed, White Lake. And it gives you contact information if so interested in getting a hold of those folks. There's also a section in there on the EPA Phase 2 stormwater regulations, which I like to bring up every year. That part of EPA regulations now requires all the municipalities, the county drain commissioner, and the road commission to get basically the same permit that we have to get for the wastewater. We all have to get discharge permits where our outlets of our systems go into the state's waters. That permit and that program cost me in my budget approximately $16,000 a year. It's very detailed. It is bringing essentially a requirement and a liability with it, where folks used to be concerned about water flowing downhill and what it may do to the neighbor. Now we have to worry not only about how fast it's flowing and what it's doing from the standpoint of erosion, but also what's in it. So we're responsible for the quality of the water now. That's being very slowly accepted by a lot of municipalities and drain commissioners alike. So, yes, Commissioner.
If you don't mind, looking at drain commission reports in the past is substantially different, redesign, new. Was the previous drain commissioner doing these same things but just didn't report on them?
I can't comment on that, Joe.
Okay. I just wondered if, because of that, we have to do something we should have been doing.
The requirements of the state through the drain code have not changed. The changes in the EPA and the state of Michigan regulatory elements with respect to water quality has changed since the last 2 2 to 5 years. I'd say probably about 2006 or 2004 it really started getting bad as far as the regulations and the liabilities, and it's probably one of the hardest things I have to do. My job right now is an educational job with not only you folks, but with the townships and municipalities as well as the property owners. And the hardest thing I have to teach to help break everybody into what goes on in my office is the water quality elements, because it's a changing world. Every time I think I understand it, I learn something new, and we're going another step further. So it's evolving across the nation, and it's everywhere.
And maybe I worded that wrong. Comparing reports, it just appears to me that office is having more and more to do than it possibly did in the past.
We, I think, are more active. We have done a tremendous amount of work as far as I'm concerned. Personally, I'm very proud of what we've been doing, but we've been getting a substantial amount of hands-on work in the drains for the last several years since I've been there. The best way I can describe on these reports, the state requires me to give you, as a county board, the last 2 pages of this report. Every drain has a trust fund, and every trust fund has a dollar value in it, and I'm required to tell you what's in that trust fund at the end of the year and what I did with the money. That's all I'm required to give you. What I'm giving you is what I do. That may be something that you're not seeing. The transparency is much broader today, and I take pride in what it is we're doing, so I'm sharing that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. As we get through the water resources, you'll hear, as we move through in the next couple of years, more and more references to watersheds. The water district is a group of property owners that effectively own and maintain their drain. I don't own it, the county doesn't own it. It belongs to the people who petitioned for and paid to build it originally. It's their drain. I am the fiduciary responsible agent to take care of the maintenance and hold the money that's associated with that drain. They are traditionally polygons, just descriptions of property. We are working diligently to try and combine a lot of these drains and reduce the number of drains the county has, make them larger districts, and those districts are more shaped in the natural resource of a true watershed. We completed one, and last night we just started in White River Township to begin on another one. So piece by piece, we're walking through the county where we get the cooperation. The next session in there is the 2012 activities. If you spend some time in there, that is a report that's primarily put together by my deputy. That is the work that he did last year. We try and give you a lot of pictures before and after of what we've been doing out there. Also in that section, you'll find some information on the GIS, which we've continued to improve on. That program is become very invaluable to me. I mean, I can't do what I do without that program. And then the final portion of it on page 26 is the guts and glory to the report, which is my certification letter on page 26, I think it is, to the Board of Commissioners in reference to the act, and actually the status of all of each one of the drain accounts, which there's a little over 300 of them. You will see on the far column in the fiscal year 12 net increase or decrease. Those are the ones we've actually worked on, where we've actually had fund activity. That was brief, and that's what I was really kind of requested to do as far as a brief report. This does not need to be approved. Oh, I do have one other thing that I want to look at in here. Appendix A, if you would look at Appendix A on page 31. That is a list of the current fees and charges that my office charges for review of subdivisions, condominiums, drain crossings, that type of stuff. And there is a current fee and a proposed 2013. The code requires me to come in and recommend changes to you as a county board, not this board, but as the full board. I need to recommend those, and I am recommending those changes to the fee structure. So that is part of my report this year. So when you accept my report at the full board level, at your next full board meeting, there is an inherent request in here that I'm asking for your approval on the new fee structure. No, sir, because it won't be this board that has to do that. What we'll be asking you, well, what I'm asking you right now is just a motion to accept and forward to the full board.
Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Fisher?
I have a question, yes.
Dave, if you go to page 30, which is the bottom of the balances in all these funds,
Mm-hmm.
I'm probably not reading it right, but over on the far right it says the decrease in the balance was like $24,904.
Of all the activity during 2012, that's the net effect to the total of all my funds.
Right. But if you look at the net revenues and the net expenses, it's more than that. It's about $50,000. I'm just curious. I'm sure there's a reason.
When you're looking at, which column are you looking at?
If you look at the second column, net revenues, and then the one next to it is net expenses, the expenses exceeded the revenues by about almost $50,000.
And we gotta go back to the accounting world to try and answer those questions, but effectively what's happening is what I spend on these drains, within 2 years I have to assess those drains. We have not been able to do the assessments. But what they're doing is they're booking the assessments in the third column from the left, 64,000. That's the net effect on the booked assessments. Okay.
So you subtract that from the
net expenses, I believe you'll find that.
Okay, I see.
Okay.
Makes no sense whatsoever.
Yeah.
I understand.
Because see, what happens, and if you look back through each one of these accounts, their balances, some of these accounts have zero balance or $50 in them or very little in it. There's been no activity over the last 20, 30 years. When I spend money, I cannot assess a drain district until that district goes into a negative state or beyond zero. I have to spend every penny that's in it before I can assess the property owners in that deal. So we end up with negative balances in these drain districts, and that makes the fund itself a very difficult thing to take care of, because effectively we're using the total amount that's in the fund to take those to eat that balance up until the income comes in when we start assessing. Now, at the same time, we may have done some work on a drain that's got, say, $30,000 in it, and I've done $10,000, so that's a true decrease in that fund. That fund we'll see it, that decrease, because we're not going to assess that. That's not going to come back into that fund. But the revenues will always be assessment funds, and they will not always add up to the expenditures I have during the year. But the expenses are all done.
I can, Dave, do we have, I noticed in our agenda, Dave, we're writing off some older receivables. Do you have receivables out there that, I'm glad that he is being very aggressive in writing these off, because they sometimes skew financial reports.
Yeah, but none of my
Would be written off.
No, what you're seeing in mine is the 2-year lag from the time that I can get the income to the time I spend the money. It's coming, and we're trying to find ways to book those receivables when we haven't even assessed them yet. The assessments will go out into September, but today we're booking the receivable at the end of 2012 budget year, which was last September, we're booking an assessment that hasn't even been assessed yet, in order to be able to show that income.
Okay, we're gonna need a motion to accept and forward to the full board.
So moved.
Support. Okay, motion by Mr. Jarzynski, second by Mr. Cross. Is there any further questions for Mr. Fisher or the motion?
I do just have
Yes.
one more question that I asked him last year. I'm asking again this year. What are we ever gonna come to some kind of agreement with the city and Norton Shores about that drain over there on Sherman? Because you said that's sort of like everybody's all in one. I mean, just the other day, the water was a foot over the road again.
What he's talking about is the low point in Sherman up by the McDonald's, just west of McLaughlin,
Yes.
or McCracken.
McCracken.
I'm sorry, just east of McCracken.
Yeah.
Water going through that drain is coming from Roosevelt Park, Norton Shores, and eventually is mixed with the city of Muskegon's water, goes through the city of Muskegon as part of the Rudderman Creek runoff, part of the west branch of the Rudderman Creek. The west branch, the north branch, and the east branch are three different watersheds that go into the Rudderman Lagoon. The Rudderman Lagoon has a TIMBL on it, which is a total minimum daily load. It's a designation that comes from the DEQ because of the quality of the water that's coming out of that going into Lake Michigan. The north branch and the east branch are county drains. The west branch is not a county drain, and I have been asking the municipalities to step forward and with resolutions to try and create a different drain district in there to help and address some of the problems in there. Mr. Halka, when he was drain commissioner, did a study probably in the early 2002, 2003, I believe it was, that was paid for by Norton Shores, City of Muskegon, and Roosevelt Park. And the recommendations in there were to replace that culvert and also to replace some other culverts downstream from Sherman. That recommendation has not been followed. The city just got done rebuilding Sherman.
Yeah.
And they did not replace that culvert, which they should have done. But I have no authority to make them do that. It's not a county drain. I'm continuing to work with them to try and get us through that. Muskegon Lake Watershed, which Tim sits on the board, which I do also, we've been pushing that. That is something we probably meet on about every 2 months at least. Every other month we're meeting on that.
Oh, and then I just thought I understood from last year when I asked about it. I thought it was
There is
sort
a
of like an
point,
all-encompassing type drain.
it is on the other two drains, but this one has not been brought into the district yet, and we need the communities to participate. That's an educational process that we're still going through, and it's difficult.
Gotcha.
Yes, sir.
I don't mean to belabor this, but Appendix D, which is legal also, which I thought is extremely valuable. And I see Ms. Webster here from the Health Department, Water Quality Control. I'm just wondering if she had any comments, Dave, I know you probably work close to her on this because you kind of listed some of the problems. And are the joint problems individual, separate? If I could suspend the rules, if she has any comments, I'd make such a motion.
Motion by Mr. Jarzynski to suspend the rules, second by Ms. Wilkins. Any discussion? All in favor? Anybody against? Okay. Ma'am, go ahead. State your name.
Victoria Webster, Public Health, Muskegon County. I think Dave does a really good job of summing up the feelings of the watershed committees and environmental health. He's brought some issues that we've had for years to the table and has been working on them diligently in cooperation, with us. So I don't think I have anything in addition to the water quality issues. In fact, Dave called me before, I think when he was finalizing this report, to see if there was any breakthroughs on some of the issues and if we had anything that we wanted to add. And he's done a really good job of being on top of the concerns of the community for the whole county, not just in the Muskegon Lake watershed, but all the watersheds.
Well,
Okay, any other questions? Yes.
I don't remember, but were there pictures normally in these reports, like of these drains?
There has been since I've been.
No other questions for her?
Oh,
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll need a motion to return back to
So moved.
sport. All in favor?
Aye.
no, you've been doing these since you've been. No, I was just gonna say, this is helpful because I think most people kind of, tune out and start talking about drains, but this actually shows that.
Doing a fine job.
Positive improvements.
Thank you very much, and one thing is, Commissioner Skolnick, and I cannot thank my staff enough and the temporary workers that come in and work for us, and you folks helped me set up a plan that was affordable and as cheaply as we can get out and work on these drains, because eventually the property owner is gonna get the bill when we go out there. But I have these kids, they come and work for me, either the temporary workers that they come and work for me for 120 days, they're making $11 or $12 an hour with no benefits, and most of them have families. We bring in help from the school systems, where we have the juniors and seniors in school that are coming to work for me. I generally ask them for the football players and not the cheerleaders, because we've got a lot of work to do out there, but we get some pretty good guys. And then we also work with the pay it back program through the county jail, and we get a couple of guys that are coming out and work with us. The last 2 summers, if you folks remember, we are out there in 100-degree plus weather and 95%, 90% plus humidity, and these guys are breaking their backs. We are working in drains that sometimes you can't even see the ditch when we get there. We're taking down trees out of the inverts of these drains that are this big around. So that'll tell you the last time it's been worked on. And I can't thank these kids enough. I mean, I bring them water, I bring them pop, we get the ice going to them as much as we can. We have little, brat parties every once in a while and feed them, and I can't believe the work that they're getting done and the conditions that they're working under. And it's bee stings and hornet stings and poison oak and poison ivy and fairly hot weather, but we get the job done.
Looks good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I was just gonna ask Dick, because I know I've seen some pictures before, but never to this extent. Most of those pictures that I'm looking at, is that just of neglect, or is that stuff that accumulates over a year's time?
I think your first word is probably the best one, yeah. It's like driving a car, a brand new car, not changing the oil for 10 years. What do you got after 10 years? Nothing. We're at a point on some of these drains where the cost to bring them back to the original, just getting the brush out of there gets me to a point where I can get in and shoot grades and see where we're at as far as where the bottom is and what the culvert shapes are and stuff like that, whether or not we'll pass water. And the cost to bring these drains back into the original design is surpassing what it cost to build them originally. And so I mean that's one way of really taking a look at it. But consolidating drains and building these drain districts into watersheds makes a whole lot easier to go in and work on these drains, because we're seeing just in numbers where it might cost a farmer $300 an acre, we're bringing it down to $4 and $5 an acre by bringing it into a big watershed, because we have so many more people involved in it. I can go out and work on that, and people aren't gonna, have a connection fit over the tax bills that you're getting. Everybody's gonna scream a little bit, but
Well,
that's my job.
my follow-up to that is, I'm just wondering I'm not gonna live forever, neither are you, but is there a way we can get your help in finding a way to put together, whether it's policies or whatever it may be, that we can somehow keep track to hold the drain commissioner responsible to make sure that these things are normally done, if that's what's supposed to be
Well,
done?
the answer, Commissioner Nash, the answer to that is a definite yes. Because I'd like to, I have the ability to go out and work in a drain to a certain level of financial. And I won't go into details, but I can only do so much on an annual point. If I want to do more than that, it has to be done by petition. I have to be enabled to go out and do this work. And those petitions are driven by property owners, townships, cities, or the county, or the health department, or the road commission. All of those entities can collectively or individually ask me to do something. And one of the things that really makes sense, and it's starting to be understood, is that for years we've watched these independent nonprofit groups, volunteers go out and do scientific studies and get grant money and put studies on the bookshelf and all this stuff and show us what the Muskegon River watershed is, or the White River watershed, or the Ryerson Creek watershed is. All they are is just it's a watershed. That's all it is. When I take and bring the drain code into it and take the drains that are inside that watershed, consolidate them, and include all of the waterways within that watershed into a brand new drain district, that watershed now has the power to do something. It can go out and do dirt and shovel projects and have an effect on the drainage issues. It can have an effect on the water quality. It can have an effect on education. It can bring grant money into this community. It can do all these things because it's an entity that was created by the state once we've converted that. Getting the petitions to convert that is difficult, especially in the urban areas. And there may be some times when I come to each one of you and sit down and say, I have a really big concern, and one of them I'm working on right now is the Little Black Creek, which goes through the center of the Heights. I mean, they got a beautiful park downtown on Little Black Creek with signs that says, don't touch the water. Am I not correct, Steve? You know, and it's horrible. That's not that big a watershed, but any one of those municipalities can give me the resolution to take that entire watershed and bring it into a drain district, and I can go after federal and state dollars to get in and clean that up on the bottom. Those are the kind of projects, that's the visions that I carry to work every day. It's just not going out and cleaning this stuff. My deputy does a darn good job of doing this, but I'm beating the ground trying to address these big problems because this office can do it if you turn me loose. Nobody's understood that. They're all afraid of the power.
Yes, I was concerned about Dave, Mr. Cross, about Mr. Cross's concern. These things may go unnoticed unless we come together and either start to communicate with them, setting a date, let's sit down and talk about these things, or they'll never get done. Next year we'll be back here with the same report and nothing has really been done. So how do we move forward by addressing this, and what do we do as commissioners?
I've had some I would like to, I'd like to answer this way, and it's not a question answer a question with a question. I would love for the board, the full board, to establish a committee to work with me and look at these things and bring reports back to you as commissioners and bring back recommendations that you can do, because there are things that you can do. You can work with your constituency below, or with the Heights Council, or with the Muskegon Township Board, or whatever it might be. And you can help me bring this education and bring this awareness back into it, so I can get the resolutions that will help me create these districts, that will help me apply for grants and stuff like that, because I'm just one voice in the wind. And a lot of times, most of the time, when you're talking about taxation or special assessment districts, which these can be, they don't always have to be looked at that way, but they become very powerful districts. They're corporations that can go handle their own individual problems. But when you talk to a lot of people, they get afraid of it. And we have to get over that hump, and I have to get a few of them done, and people have to see what they can do for that watershed, and talk to some of the other political leaders that have seen success in this. But if you could form a committee of 3 or 4 commissioners that would meet with me regularly, I will keep you informed as far as what I'm doing and what kind of problems I'm having, where my resistance is, why I think those resistances are there. I'd be more than happy to meet with you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Eagle?
I believe the bottom line on this is each of the individual communities with the fiduciary have to agree that they want to participate. And that has been the problem in the past generations, is that it's kids separate, but it's dumb to want to give up a situation to a larger group.
Well, I know that I've worked on with the Monolith watershed district, you know, but when you work on it, but you're just constantly there, you never really see the results that you're hoping for. And everybody is striving hard to trying to get grants, trying to do this. And this is what we need to eliminate. Tell us what we need to do, and then we can do it.
You know, and it's, a lot of times you see a lot of spinning wheels, and I get as frustrated as the next person. I say, I hate to see federal dollars get spent over and over and over again studying the same problem and never get anything done. Kim knows that I'm frustrated in some of these meetings that we go to, and you know, I don't see any fruit on the tree. The grant potential for watershed organizations, which our municipalities have allowed to go out and do the work. It's easy for the political people to stand back and let those guys go out and meet and drive the train down the road. Once in a while they get a little bit of grants, but when they apply for grants, they need a governmental entity behind them to get that grant. So every once in a while they come to you through Whimsidick or whatever, and they might say, would you guys support it if we went after this grant? That's why they're here. Because those grants don't go to people that aren't responsible. There's no requirement of, you know, they're not responsible for the tax dollars like you are. So they need something back. When you create these watersheds as drain districts, they are capable of getting those grants. We can work through my office. I can work through our grant people. We can chase that money once we get these districts set up like that, because the feds and the state will award grants to a district. That district is a living, breathing piece of government.
Okay, Mr. Schneider.
I just want to reiterate too, though, I like the ideas of looking forward and moving forward. But it looks as though we've been neglecting our drain systems. And I'd like to just see some way that you can help us structure where we can make sure, no matter what happens with that drain office, that these normal things will be taken care of. Because there's really no excuse for what we're looking at. If you offer me a wage for my work, then that's what I'm supposed to do. And I don't see how you could be doing so much more than anybody else should be doing. You understand what I'm saying? I think that's a tribute to you as a person, but there's no way that we should have someone elected into a position like that that's supposed to have a basic job done, and those jobs being neglected.
You know, I've been close with the last few drain commissioners, and I've got to say, Charles, in the last 5 years, and I agree with you 100%, this office has made a quantum leap forward. And yeah, there's more, but if you look where we were and where we are, I'm very proud of that office.
Dave is doing a marvelous job, but that's a political office, that's elected, and the people elected in that political office has the ability to do what he or she thinks should be done. So the problem comes in the election time, where you need to make sure that they're, we're hung up on parties, and I think you need to look at the individual and look at the background, and I'm not sure that's being done in all cases.
Well, it's more up to, not necessarily up to us, it's more up to the people out there that are putting people in office.
Exactly.
Well, I differ just a little bit, and that's because no matter who's elected, should have the capabilities and the knowledge to be able to do the job. Yes, that's on us, but I think there's some basic standards that we can hold people to, whether they have the knowledge or not, which, I don't know, politically I guess it'll expose it, but, you know, if I'm paid to sweep the building every night, and I never sweep the building, somebody should be holding me accountable for that. And if I'm just not doing it, and just letting it go, then, you know, I think that's, you know, I mean, it's really on this board, because the board is really kind of overseeing that piece too, even though it's elected official. But it also goes back to the commissioners, so you do have a couple of, you know, couple of entities that should be holding, you know, feet to the fire. But I don't think anybody, as an elected official, including commissioners, can just hold office and do whatever they want. You know, I think it's really up to people to hold people to a standard.
That's 100-year-old. That's an office that was created almost 100 years ago, and many of the rules were written at a different time. And Dave has the ability within his, Dave, just because he's here now, but
Right.
whoever is there has the ability to run that office as they see fit, and the only checks come in the circuit court. And even those are not what they would be if it was set up today.
I will say though that as far as this report goes, I think it's a very detailed, clear report, and Mr. Fisher, I think it's something you should be very proud of what you've accomplished. So thank you.
Thank you.
So we do have a motion on the table, and so without if there's no more discussion, we should press that motion. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All against, please say the same. Okay, motion passes. And Mr. Fisher, could you go on with the items for consideration?
Sure. Number 1 is loan from solid waste.
So moved.
Support.
Moved by Mr. Cross, seconded by Ms. Wilkins. Is there any discussion? No discussion on the, yes?
Could you explain a little bit what it is?
Yeah, John Warner, Public Works Department. What we're doing here is in Pioneer Park, we have a lot of gravel roads, and we have a lot of roads that are asphalt, but in very, very bad shape and falling apart. They need some maintenance. So what we did is went to the road commission and worked with them to say, what can you come out and do for us to fix the roads we've got and to help us get the new ones paved. The road commission's given us a proposal with costs and everything for their time and for the paving and all. Comes out to $95,000 and some change, which includes fixing the roads and doing one new handicap accessible campsite. So I took those numbers and bumped it up to 5 handicap accessible sites, plus all the road improvements. Comes out to about $107,000. The parks don't have that kind of ready cash. So what we proposed in this case is that solid waste will basically loan money to the equipment revolving fund, and the equipment revolving fund will go to the parks so they can do their project. Parks will pay back the equipment revolving fund, who will then pay back solid waste at the end of the 10-year term of payback. It allows us to get the project done and pay for it over time, paying it back with interest, but we're basically paying ourselves back the interest. So it works out well for everybody.
Yes, Mr.
Did you work this out through Paul Bowman?
No, this all comes
Prices
through Lori Peterson.
From Lori, do you have a commitment from them to do it when you need it, or is this when they have time to come and do it?
It's gonna be when they can schedule it, but it will be this season.
Okay.
Yes.
Just out of curiosity, did you get a bid from somebody else?
No, we didn't. It's one of those intergovernmental cooperation things that we thought would work out very nicely. They have all the facilities that we need to do all the work.
I'm just concerned maybe it's not competitive. I don't have any idea. I don't know. Maybe, I mean, I know they're doing their best, but maybe it's just, it'd be nice to see some, maybe it won't, I don't know.
If I can maybe address that, our road commission does stuff for Iowa, for Kent, for Muskegon. They are by far the best in the side of the state, and they are very competitive, or they wouldn't be doing it for the other counties.
Absolutely. I agree. Yes.
Looking at some of those units that are brought into these campgrounds, I wonder if those were originally designed to handle some of that equipment. I mean, some of these motorhomes
say it's doubtful they were ever designed to handle those loads, because the last time they were paved, looking at their condition, couldn't have been any more recent than the 70s. And probably they go back even farther than that.
So I know they're in need of repair.
Yeah. Well, the footing will be capable of handling the current loads on trailers and such.
Okay, and Mr. Fisher?
Yeah, I think your last paving was much sooner than that. I stayed there in the 70s and they were all gravel roads. And Pioneer. I think it was probably the 80s.
Okay,
Then they definitely weren't designed up to a good standard.
any further questions? Okay, with that then, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
We have a roll call.
Absolutely, not, yes, my fault. Yeah, thank you for reminding me, Mr. Jarzynski. Can we have a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Nash?
No.
Mr. Sable?
Yes.
Mr. Skolnick?
No, I'm gonna vote
Ms. Wilkins?
Yes.
Mr. Cross?
Yes.
Mr. Darasinski?
Yes.
Mr. Engel?
Yes.
And Mr. Fisher?
Yes.
Motion carried. Item number 2 is write-off accounts receivable.
Okay, motion by Mr. Jarzynski, second by Ms. Wilkins. Is there any, Mark, could you tell us about that?
Mark Eisenberg, Director of Wastewater. This one here in front of you is the one that's been out there for quite a while. 2008, 2009. As you can see, it was turned over to the attorney, Ted Williams' office. To try to collect this, the company did file bankruptcy, and we were on their list to be paid, but as you can tell in his letter, that they didn't have near the funds to support their outstanding debt. And by the time we started paying people off, we were down the line where we could not get paid off on what the court systems set up on this one. Since then, we did update in 2009. The full board did actually updated the policies and how we make sure this doesn't happen again. And we're following those policies on new accounts. Everyone that's late, either 30, 60, or 90 days, we keep a running tally on them. And the first step is obviously send them a letter. Second step, we go to Washington there, take a card, turn it off on them. Third one, we'll look in payment plans that we set up with them, and I have several payment plans. If that's not the case, then it goes to Ted, and for those that go into court orders, I have 3 that are in court orders. So I guess the reason I want to share that with you is apparently this is a hard business for these companies. So learning what we did on this in 2009, we're staying on top of it, trying to stay on top of it. And it's harder too. Some of the septic haulers real quick might only bring in 800 gallons, while other ones can bring in up to 9,000. They're using the semis. And they might bring in 3 in one day. So over a month period, you can add up quite a bill, as this company did. 30,000 would be uncommon for them. So then 2 months out, 60,000, 3 months out, 90,000. So we, the office, is keeping a close eye on this and working with Ted's office, getting out letters to make sure something like this doesn't occur again.
Yes, sir, Mr.
I think it's good policy. We get these receivables off the books. It wasn't too long ago, cleaning this mess up gave us a very different picture than we had before of our accounts. And getting them off the books, what we see is a much truer, cleaner picture. And glad you continue with that, because it did put us in a position of a larger raise than we really wanted to put in our sewer rates a few years ago. I watch the numbers and I'd like to know what they need. There's a lot of receivables out there that are really going to be received. You get a false impression. And I tell you, Heath has done an excellent job in all ours. I really
tell me how these charges accrue.
Yes. Once there's an interest there on each one of those, so the last time that they brought us waste, we were looking in roughly May 15th. Then after that, starting in August, the 1,079, that's a recurring interest. As long as it's still in bankruptcy court and it hasn't been closed out or hasn't been collected, those finances continue to charge, so they continue to add up.
Oh, no, I think I meant that myself. I guess I'm looking, what service were they providing us that they were accruing a debt to us?
They're a septic hauler. They're bringing industrial waste from this cherry facility, so it's cherry waste that they were bringing to our wastewater facility, discharging into us, our system.
Okay. And I guess I'm concerned too of how this plan develops over this amount of time, you know. I don't know.
Yes, my concern is as well.
Yeah, because this is started back in 208, and even 208, you had accumulation of a certain amount of dollars. And then you get to 209, and I guess that's when you finally got a $12,000 payment. But then it accumulates even more from there, and then I guess goes all the way up through with no payments. But it seems somewhere in there we've got to realize that, hey, after enough, we need to get some payment to,
I agree. I went back and looked at the letters that sent to this company, and the letters were started going out in 206, the letter went out in 207, 208, and 209. And what they would do, the letter would go out, they would make a payment, then they would fall behind. They would send another letter, the payment would go out, we get corporate counsel involved. They would send letters, they would make payments, and then they make a 90-day payment outstanding, and then they would fall behind again. So it was a company, and in 06, Sappy obviously was still discharging to us. And it was a small amount when we talked about the total 28 million gallons from that time, but as Sappy dropped off, this little thing became a bigger issue that's just signed right.
That's small.
You know, a couple of things here. I have been following this because I've just seen what the letters that distributors firm and sent and back and forth, and having been in this situation personally with receivables, I understand how it happens, but looks like it would be impossible to happen, but it's not. It's a big customer. I just wanted to point out that the total debt is $2,304,000, and their assets are $27.19. Now, how that happens, I don't know. I'd like to take lessons from this guy, because how you get people to let you borrow that much money with no assets is, I don't know how it happens. It's crazy.
It'd be a guess on my part. Maybe take and shine some light on it.
$27.
That is curious.
That's got to be a record.
Yeah, it's always showing in filings.
Just gotta work with the right bank.
Yeah.
Well, that was over time, when you have a high volume of dollars flowing through, they probably had more than $27 when they started.
Yeah,
But as you have a high volume of money flowing through, it gets to be a problem so quick. Plus, that was during the time when, I don't know what you want to call it, slow times for the economy. And things just died.
One more quick question here. I just want to know, do we have a way to track some of these that we're writing off? Because sometimes these businesses open up in one name, and once everybody catch on, they claim bankruptcy, and then they open up in something else. Do we have a way to track that as far as ownerships or presidents to make sure we're not running into some type of Kanye?
Yes.
Under the bankruptcy law, once a debt is discharged, there's nothing you're going to do to go back and collect it without yourself violating the statute. And there's always a possibility of showing that there's been some sort of fraud taking place. That's always a possibility, but difficult to prove. Typically, what we find more so than bankruptcies is companies just going out of business. and you'll have some guy with a couple trucks, and when he sells his business to another guy that sells trucks, and they're just going with it. And there are no assets for us to even go after. That's what we're finding. I think if there is fraud, that's probably where it's at. But it's just very difficult to track, and the results are uncertain.
We don't get out of jail.
Okay, with no more questions on this motion, we'll go ahead and vote by roll call, please.
Mr. Nash?
Yes.
Mr. Sable?
Yes.
Mr. Skolnick?
Yes.
Ms. Wilkins? Mr. Cross?
Yes.
Mr. Derzinski?
Yes.
Mr. Engel? Yes. Mr. Fisher?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Okay, and next is our informational items.
Motion to accept and place on file.
Support. Motion by Mr. Derzinski, seconded by Mr. Cross. Any questions on those reports? Yes.
Our flow, is it any better?
We budgeted 12 million gallons per day for 2013. It's right there, 12.1. And normally in the springs, we normally see that number come back up. So I'm confident that we'll be above that number, 12 million gallons per day. So we're looking good there. The haul waste is above what we projected there. And again, septic haulers, we don't like to project really high for septic haulers because one day they can come to us, next day they can go to Grand Rapids, they can go to Holland. I mean, they have a choice of where to go. So always a little more conservative on the hauled waste. The pipe waste is a little bit easier to judge, obviously.
And you know, my major concern has always been the scouring velocities. What are we doing to keep the pipe from septic?
Again, he's referring to the force main, 11-mile force main from the C station to the wastewater facility. We always like to see engineering design is 2 feet per second. To get that, we have to look at 18 million gallons per day. Obviously, we're going 12, so we're not seeing that. So the thought pattern is that the stuff settles out as it works its way up. One thing that we do have going for us is during the spring, the rain events, there's obviously an infiltration there. Or not necessarily infiltration, that's all connected to our system. That will help us get that scouring effect up again. And so it's like flushing it through and then cleans it up. One thing to say on that, before we let the new facility, new pipe take over back in 2010-ish, 2009, the old pipe that was left in the ground, we went in there and looked at that. There wasn't a lot of buildup on there. Some places was only 6 inches, other places were 2 foot. So that rain event does help us get that solids up and carried on to the wastewater facility.
And we used to get that scouring velocity in reverse about every 3-4 years on
Not anymore.
coming back down the hill.
I've got a question actually for both you and John. The other night I was at the Dalton Township board meeting, and they were contemplating which carrier they were going to use for their solid waste. And one of the carriers that they were looking at carries his stuff out of the county to another facility. Do we have any sales efforts in place to try to lure those people to use Muskegon?
It depends who the hauler is. Currently at our landfill, we have all the local haulers in Muskegon County. All the small guys come to us because we're the cheapest game in town. Allied Waste will haul to their own landfill in Ottawa County or in Pearson, which they own, those landfills. Waste Management refuses to deal with us at all. They will not bring anything to us, so they put everything in a transfer station and run it down to Ogden Hills in Zealand. So if you've got one of the Muskegon County small haulers, odds are they're coming to us anyway. So if they're going out of county with it, it's probably Allied or Waste Management that they're looking at.
Just one thing to add to that, Don, don't go away, then you can finish this. There's a solid waste management plan that the county is supposed to develop. The laws, what, every 5 years or something like that. That's not been the easiest thing to keep going in the county. up is what you're talking about is flow controls. Kent County has been able to control their flows, and as a result, they do recycling and a lot of other things, because they've solved that flow control issue. We've never been able to solve that in Muskegon County. And that's an issue that probably should be taken up, and we should be looking at a solid plan, which could answer your question, trying to get there.
Legally, we have the right to close our borders and allow no solid waste to leave the county, but currently with the size of our landfill, we are not prepared to handle those kind of volumes. We would fill up in about 2 years. And we're not prepared for that. If we had a bigger site, we would seriously consider flow control and closing our boundaries.
Is that the same with the wastewater too, Mark?
It'd be the opposite, actually.
We want to go out
All right. There is a motion on the table to place these on file. Any more questions? All in favor?
Aye.
All against? Okay. Next is old business. Is there any old business to come before the board?
I'd like to ask Mark, I'm sorry, did I interrupt somebody? Okay, Mark, the gentleman that we brought in that gave us that great presentation on fracking, it seems to be coming back. And I wondered if you could give me his phone number. I looked up the minutes for his name, but I have no way of contacting him.
Yes, he was,
Could you email me?
I can email him. He was promoted and moved to another section into the state of Michigan, so I'll try to find that for you.
Okay, yeah, if you could email me that,
I can do that.
okay, there's some new questions that coming up my area.
Okay. Any other old business? Any new business? No new business? Public comment on a new item? And seeing none, adjourn. All in favor?
Right.